For the longest time, I agreed with the mainstream consensus that the only two first-person shooters worth talking about on the PS1 were both Medal of Honor games. I held this view simply because that's what everyone said, and also due to my ignorance of the PS1 library as a whole. Over the years, though, as my collection has grown to over 200 games for the system, my viewpoint has dramatically changed on the issue, because I've collected quite a few more first-person shooter games. This is not a complete list, as I do not own every first-person shooter for the system. The biggest omission being Power Slave, aka Exhumed, which I've still yet to get my hands on in any form, PS1, Saturn, or PC. I also decided to stick mainly to games with traditional first-person shooter gameplay conventions, so I'm not going to feature some blended genre ones. I was tempted to put Descent Maximum, and Forsaken on this list, as they're hard to classify, but decided against it. Also, I consider Jumping Flash to be more of a platformer than a first-person shooter, so it won't be on this list either. And with that being said, here's a quick rundown of the first-person shooters on the PS1 I own personally. 007. The world is not enough. Let's talk about a potential recipe for disaster. Upon dropping the ball with the disappointing Tomorrow Never Dies, the first Bond game post GoldenEye, EA, the new holder of the Bond license at the time, went back to the exact same developer, Black Ops Entertainment, to make The World Is Not Enough. The result, actually, Black Ops completely made up for their mistake with a surprisingly good first-person shooter. While the PS1 version isn't on par with the Eurocom-developed Nintendo 64 version, it is a completely different game and a good one in its own right. No dual analog controls here, but single analog controls similar to those found in GoldenEye. Definitely worth a look. Alien Resurrection. This is one to play with the lights on, as the tense atmosphere will keep you on your toes. This hit near the end of the PS1's lifetime, and is a solid but very challenging first-person shooter. The enemies are numerous, checkpoints far apart, and the ammo in short supply. It's a tough but satisfying experience. It also supports dual analog control, and even the PS1 mouse for aiming. Alien Trilogy. This being the older of the two Alien games on the PS1 is less atmospheric than Resurrection, but still has a great atmosphere. If you're a fan of Doom-style games, then this should be right up your alley. Essentially, this is Doom in the Aliens universe. Perhaps a bit of an oversimplification, but if you still love classic Doom, look into Trilogy. Armorines Project S.W.A.R.M. Even for its time, Armorines was a pretty average first-person shooter. I happen to own it on the PS1 and the N64. The PS1 version allows for a modern dual analog setup with some tweaking to the control settings. It also seems to move a lot faster than the Nintendo 64 version, which feels slightly sluggish in comparison. The PS1 version looks much uglier, and literally slows down into a slideshow at times in two-player cooperative play. If you're collecting for the PS1, this isn't a bad pickup, but if you have a choice between them, the Turok engine running N64 version is probably the better buy. Codename Tenka, also known as Life Force Tenka in Europe, has the distinguished honor of being the first fully polygonal first-person shooter on the PS1. Its gameplay is the simple get the key and open the door with a few puzzles added here and there style. Tenka won't thrill every gamer, but I've always found its gameplay to be engaging and kind of disorienting at the same time. This is definitely not one for people who are not into old school shooter designs with pre-analog controllers, and it certainly won't be the best on the PS1 for those who are. It is still worth a look, and the soundtrack is rocking with trademark Psygnosis electronic beats. There's also some melodramatic story elements in between the levels.
But when they've thawed, there's gonna be one real wholesome smell in there.
Delta Force Urban Warfare. The original PC Delta Force series was one of the earliest modern/tactical shooter series. But Urban Warfare is more GoldenEye than tactical shooter. Released in 2002, Urban Warfare is an objective-based modern first-person shooter. It's a little choppy, but is actually still one of the best-looking PS1 games ever released. And what's better is it's actually fun to play. There were even some people around the time it came out that made claims that it had PS2 quality graphics. As stated, level setup is similar to GoldenEye, but with a more tactical feel. If I had to compare it, it feels more like a modern Medal of Honor than being more comparable to the arcadey feel of GoldenEye. The missions have good variety to them, and this also supports dual analog control for more precise aiming. Disruptor. And you thought Resistance Fall of Man was Insomniac's first foray into first-person shooters. Disruptor adds its own twist to the formula by adding psionic attack abilities. The level designs, while not the greatest ever seen, are still solid. The game still plays well considering the age and the old-school design style. And let's not forget the epic full-motion video sequences that take place as the reward for beating levels? Maybe?
You said Dad was the best of the best.
Well, until I came along, right?
Save your bragging till later, because this time we're really putting you to the test.
Doom Custom PlayStation Edition. This PlayStation port of Doom features levels from the original Doom and Doom 2. How many levels when compared to the PC originals? I really can't say because I'm not a Doom expert. This PlayStation port is less of a direct port of Doom and would best be described as Doom Remix, as some changes have been made, like adding colored lighting, a new moody, ambient soundtrack, nixing the MIDI compositions of the PC version, and even adding some Doom 2 enemies into the original Doom. Duke Nukem Total Meltdown. This PlayStation port moves so incredibly fast that I couldn't even keep the gameplay in sync with the Saturn and N64 versions in an old comparison video I made. As far as the levels and features go, this is the closest port to the PC original. It also has an excellent remix soundtrack. Visual glitches aside, this game moves fast and still retains the great design and gameplay first seen in the PC version. It even supports dual analog controls, though really suckily. There's also link cable multiplayer for when you want to make your friends look like the pansies that they are. Shake it, baby!
Nobody steals our chicks and lives.
Final Doom. I have still yet to play much of this PS1 port, but it apparently doesn't have all the levels of the PC original. In fact, they actually threw in 13 levels from the master levels of Doom 2 into this game. But it still retains the classic Doom gameplay in a moody, atmospheric environment, thank you, colored lighting, with the ambient music of the first PS1 port. If you appreciate the smooth gameplay and the moody Doom atmosphere of the original and Doom 64, this is a no-brainer. Kileak the DNA Imperative. This PS1 launch game can best be described as an early experiment in 3D gaming. I'm not sure if I fully consider this a first-person shooter, as it has none of the established norms of the genre, like competent level designs or fun gameplay. I guess I wouldn't say that this game is horrible, just incredibly bland and uninspired. Granted, I haven't played very far into it, so maybe it gets much better later on and I haven't given it a chance. Looking back, as a launch game, I could actually imagine early PS1 adopters being mesmerized by this one, but it certainly has not aged well at all.
Cartridge secured.
Medal of Honor. I really don't have to tell anyone about Medal of Honor, so instead I'll tell you what I like about the original over the later high production entries into the series. What I love about the atmosphere in this game is that it goes more into the mythos of World War II as opposed to being a large battle-style game. It has more of an Indiana Jones or James Bond feel to it than a Saving Private Ryan feel. It dives deeper into the rich historical-based mythology of the war and has, in my opinion, a much richer atmosphere than the recent "let's copy Call of Duty which first copied us" entries into the series. The original was also the first shooter to use the World War II setting in a historically accurate way. Wolfenstein had Nazis in it, but Medal of Honor was the first to really use the historical setting in an atmospherically right way. I honestly wish that Medal of Honor would return to its roots and be more of that darker, atmospheric World War II type mythos type game, because we have enough big, huge, epic battle, everyone shooting, firing, things exploding, stupid storylines, hey, stack up on this door, hey, where are you going, you're out of this mission field because you wanted to explore type games. I just feel that the series has lost a lot in recent memory. Medal of Honor Underground. I have owned Underground for years, but have still yet to play it further than the first mission. Underground follows the plight of a woman in the French Resistance. This one also goes into the mythology of the war and even explores Nazi occult practices. Men in Black, the series, Crashdown. This one surprised me. I must have received it in an eBay game lot because I don't fully remember how I acquired it. I decided to pop it in and playtest it just to see how bad this licensed game I had never heard of was, only to find, surprisingly, a competent, fully 3D first-person shooter based off the Men in Black cartoon. I thought I was pretty knowledgeable about the PS1's library, but I had never even heard of this game and never seen it covered in any magazines at the time either. I've only played about 3 levels into it, so I can't comment on the overall quality, but from what I have played I enjoyed. Sometimes licensed games have some surprising quality to them. PO'd. Ever play a game that makes you ask, what the heck am I playing? This 3DO to PlayStation port is one of those kinds of games. The zany concept of the protagonist being a chef on a spaceship that has been overrun by aliens, Steven Seagal style, is complemented by an odd cast of enemies and weapon set, in what can also be described as experimental early 3D level designs. This is a strange one, but it certainly is worth a look. It feels a little sluggish in the controls, but not to a game-ruining point. It also has a fun training mode where you decimate hordes of respawning enemies ad infinitum. Quake II! For the longest time, the PS1 port of Quake II was green eggs and ham to me. I had no interest in playing it. I already owned it on the Nintendo 64 and later acquired the beastly PC version. It wasn't until I finally watched footage of this game in action on YouTube that I finally saw how impressive it was. A fast-paced, fully polygonal first-person shooter with an action focus, with very little slowdown, and even 4-player split-screen multiplayer thrown in for good measure. I was incredibly surprised and happily wrong about what has become my favorite first-person shooter on the PlayStation 1. Its unfortunate release date, pitting it up against Medal of Honor, Final Fantasy VIII, and the Dreamcast launch, sort of buried this one. However, in terms of fluidity, Quake II leaves all other PS1 shooters in the dust, hands down. Star Wars Dark Forces. The humble beginnings of what eventually blossomed into the Jedi Knight franchise. Dark Forces has you playing as Kyle Katarn, a former Imperial stormtrooper who defected to the Rebellion. You blast your way through a multitude of Doom-inspired levels and hordes of Imperial baddies. The game came under fire for its blurry and choppy visuals. Those prone to motion sickness, you've been warned. But if you can look beyond that, you'll find a fun and rewarding adventure set in the Star Wars universe. And lastly on the list is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Rogue Spear. Obviously, if you have a PC that has been made within the last, 17 years or earlier, you should probably just go on Steam or wherever and download the vastly superior PC version of this game if you're looking for your Rainbow Six fix. That being said, the PS1 port of the game is overall playable, if not incredibly flawed. With the ease of getting your hands on the PC version nowadays, I can only really suggest this to PS1 specific collectors and nostalgic gamers if this was the version that you used to own.